I'm just going to come around and say it. Princess Elise is not a good character. In other news, water is wet, the sky is blue, the Five Nights at Freddy's video game series is overrated, Danganronpa V3 had a stupid ending, and Twilight is not a well-written book series. In other words, the fact that Elise is not a good character is something that you already know, but I don't think that anyone has fully dissected her character, or lack thereof, to explain why she sucks so much. For example, people often point out that Elise is too boring, or too passive, or gets kidnapped too much. And let's face it, all of these points are pretty damn true. But there are other reasons that don't get mentioned or explained enough, which is why I made this video. I want to point out that I don't hate Elise or even dislike her. I'll even admit that she gets too much hate. So I don't have anything against Elise. I just don't care about her, and I don't see a reason to, as we'll see in this video. I already talked a bit about how bad of a character Elise was in a different video, which I'll link in the description. But I wanted to further explain why I felt that way in a separate video. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show! Before I talk about Elise, let's first talk about her backstory. Elise was born into a royal family. Her father was the Duke of a city named Soliana, and her mother was a Duchess. However, Elise's mother died when Elise was very young, so the Duke had to raise Elise on his own. Additionally, the royal family was entrusted with a flame-like entity named Solaris, the Flame of Hope. Wow, that name is so ironic! According to the Duke, the flame will get larger over time, allowing people to time travel and control history. The Duke then had the idea of experimenting with Solaris to harness the power of time travel, presumably to see his late wife once again. Unfortunately, that plan backfired. On the day that would be known as the Solaris Incident, while the Duke was doing one of his experiments, Solaris, who was in a glass prison, grew enraged and unstable, most likely due to being confined and tested on against its will for so long. Young Elise, who was in her pajamas and was in the laboratory for some fucking reason, ran into the room that her father was doing the experiment in, and when her father noticed her, Solaris exploded, killing all the other researchers in the room. Fortunately, the Duke and Elise were still alive. Elise was merely knocked unconscious, thanks to her father using his body to protect her from the explosion. However, her father's body sustained massive damage from the explosion, so he didn't have much time to live. With his glass prison broken, Solaris used this opportunity to split into Memphilis and Iblis and escape. Shadow and Silver were luckily there at the time, so they chased after the two. Before Shadow left, the Duke handed him the Scepter of Darkness in order to seal Memphilis. Then the Duke headed to a room where Silver was trying to contain Iblis with his psychic powers. Silver urged the Duke to leave, but the Duke insisted on staying, telling Silver that only he could contain Iblis. The Duke, with Elise in his arms, walked up to the monster Iblis and placed Elise on a nearby altar. Then he used the Chaos Emerald to seal Iblis within Elise. With his dying hot-ass breath, the Duke grabbed the unconscious Elise, handed her off to Silver, and told Silver to take her to a safe place. He also told Elise that she could not cry, or her tears will call forth the monster inside her. Then he tells her to live happily. Wow. And dies right after that. Of course, Elise couldn't hear any of this, but in another flashback that occurred before the Solaris incident, we see the Duke sitting on a chair and telling Elise to be brave and not to cry, no matter what misfortune comes her way. Presumably, this was shortly after Elise's mother's death, but we don't know that for sure. Either way, Elise took her father's words to heart, and from this day forward for the next 10 years, she began the difficult task of keeping her emotions in check, namely her crying. Going back to the Solaris incident, Silver left the castle and found Shadow outside with the Scepter of Darkness in his hand. Both lead the young Elise with the scepter in front of a nearby tree and make a portal to return to the present. Shadow left first, but Silver decided to hand the sleeping Elise the blue Chaos Emerald as a lucky charm. Oh shit. Before leaving himself. And that's Elise's backstory. The game then sends us 10 years into the future, and now we have Princess Elise III as the sole sovereign of Soliana at the tender age of 17. This brings me to my first problem with Elise, her backstory. She's implied to have struggled with keeping her emotions in check for 10 whole years, but we never see that. We're shown the tragic death of Elise's father, but then we skip ahead 10 years into the present without any events in between being shown. Thus, we do not get any insight or context as to how much Elise was struggling emotionally throughout the entire decade. Don't get me wrong. The game tells us that Elise is suffering emotionally, but it hardly shows us. We get only one scene where Elise wants to cry, but doesn't. That's not enough. We need more than that. Now, I'm not saying that we need to see every instance where Elise wants to cry but can't. I'm just saying that showing additional scenes of moments of Elise's childhood where she nearly breaks down, especially as the years progress, would have better illustrated her pain and would have made it easier for the audience to connect to and empathize with her. But that didn't happen. Instead, the game hardly dwells on Elise's internal struggle, despite it being one of the most important plot devices in the story. So I have no context at all. Don't just tell me that Elise is suffering emotionally. Show me. And there's more to this issue. In one scene where Sonic and Elise are in some beautiful forest, Princess Elise mentions another struggle she has.
Though I've been frightened many times, I've also enjoyed this adventure. It allowed me to be something other than a princess. I was able to be myself. A girl.
Sonic at one point says,
"It sounds like being a princess isn't that easy."
Elise responds with,
"It isn't sometimes, but I love this country."
"Do you mind showing me this instead of telling me, you boring ass bitch?" Oh, I'm just kidding. Elise isn't a bitch. Anyway, this is just another tragic case of telling instead of showing. The writers could have shown us some instances where Elise struggled with being a princess so we could fully understand the huge burden and responsibility placed on her, which would have made her more interesting and more sympathetic. But that didn't happen, so the audience has no reason to care. Now let's talk about Elise's personality. Actually, we can't, because it is virtually non-existent. Elise is shown to be a kind, polite, passive, sheltered, and reserved girl. And that's really it for her character. No, I'm not joking. That's really it. And it's not good enough. I need more than that if the writers truly want me to care about Elise. I want to know what her likes and dislikes are. I want to know what her hobbies are and what makes her tick. I want to know what her hopes, dreams, wishes, and desires are. For example, is she a science whiz? Does she like Japanese food? Is she into machines? Does she have an interest in fashion? Does she hate school? I want to know about stuff like that. Now, I'm not expecting the writers to provide us with every detail of Elise's character because I don't need to know everything about her. Still, I would have liked to know more about her character because the game barely gave me any material to work with. Seriously, giving Elise a few quirks and hobbies would have made her a much more interesting character. And you know what the funny thing is? Elise is actually a combination of Chris Thorndike and Helen from the anime Sonic X. Elise is like Helen because, much like Elise, Helen didn't have her parents around too. Although, unlike Elise's parents, Helen's parents weren't dead. They just worked a lot. The same could be said for Chris Thorndike's parents. In essence, all three characters had absent parents. Plus, Sonic went on an afternoon date with Helen just as he did with Elise, and both dates ended up being dangerous and exciting because someone was pursuing the couple. In Helen's case, the President's men were chasing Sonic and her. In Elise's case, Dr. Eggman was after Sonic and her. Moreover, Elise is very much like Chris for two reasons. The first reason is that she was born into a wealthy family, just like Chris. The second reason is that she developed a friendship with Sonic, and when she was confronted with the decision of saving the world at the cost of losing her new best friend, who actually made her happy, she initially refused to give him up, just like Chris did. As you can see, Elise's character was highly influenced by the characters of Chris and Helen. This isn't surprising, since one of the writers for this game, Kyoko Yoshimura, actually worked on Sonic X. It's too bad that Elise actually managed to be written even more poorly than Chris and Helen combined. Since Sonic X existed before Sonic 2006 did, you would think that Kyoko's writing skills would have improved by the time Sonic 2006 was created. Oh well, at least her writing skills got better in Sonic Unleashed. Sort of. In any case, the point is that Elise's personality is underdeveloped. You can't expect me to care about her character if you are not going to fill in the blanks, Sonic Team. Now, let's talk about the third problem with Elise's character. Her death. Near the end of Sonic's story, Elise is forced to go with Dr. Eggman to prevent him from destroying the city. However, Dr. Eggman's ship malfunctions and he and Elise end up dying in a crash. Sonic then goes,
Elise!
okay, am I supposed to care? Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not heartless. This was a sad death, but it's not really something that's going to make me teary-eyed. We barely got a chance to connect with this character, and the writers expected me to suddenly cry a lot simply because she died? Really? No, that's not how good storytelling works. It's not enough to make Elise a tragic character for me to care about her. Yeah, it's sad that her parents died. Yeah, it's sad that she had a lot of responsibility placed on her at such a young age. Yeah, it's sad that she has a fire demon inside her. Yeah, it's sad that she never got to experience life much. And yeah, it's sad that she died on the egg carrier in a crash, but none of that is enough. I want to get to know Elise as a person. I don't want to know about only her struggles in life. She's not just a damn victim, she's also a person. Like, seriously, can anyone name a single detail about Elise that doesn't involve her tragic backstory in any way? No? Psh, neither can I. What makes Elise's death worse is that time travel exists in the Sonic universe. This means that Sonic can just go back in time and prevent Elise's death, which makes the already almost non-existent emotional impact of Elise's death here even more pointless. I don't know. I don't fucking know. Like, why even have her die in the first place? And I know that some people are going to say something like, oh, well, you want Elise to die then? You want the alternative? You don't want her to live and shit? And I say to that, no, you fucking morons. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm not saying that Elise should have died. What I'm saying is that I'm rather tired of seeing characters getting killed off in a story, only to be brought back right after. What exactly is the point of that? I find that writers who pull this bullshit fall into two categories. Those who feel that death should have no consequences, and those who are too afraid to kill off their own characters. Frankly, I don't like either camp. If you're that afraid to kill your own characters off, then either don't kill them off, or kill them off, but bring them back with some sort of sacrifice. For example, someone else has to die for the victim to come back. Now, it's not that you can't ever bring back someone without killing someone else off, but this should be done sparingly. Sadly, that's not the case in real life because I see this shit far too often in both Western and Japanese storytelling. You'll have to forgive me if I get annoyed when I see a plot like that of Sonic 2006, and Sonic is like, oh no, Elise died! And Silver is like, no wait, we have time travel. And Sonic is like, oh yeah fam, that's right, no, just fuck off with that shit and shove it up your big bloated ass because I don't have the patience for it. Stop wasting everyone's time with meaningless death scenes, Sonic Team. Now, to further explain how pointless Elise's death was, let's contrast Elise's death with Blaze the Cat's death. I put death in quotes because Blaze technically didn't die, she just got sent to another dimension, but whatever. Blaze's death was, to be frank, just as pointless as Elise's death. But there's a key difference between the two. Blaze's death had actual consequences. When Blaze died, she didn't come back. She didn't get saved or rescued. She went to another dimension and stayed there. As a consequence, Silver no longer had a friend to rely on.
That scene was really sad, but the scene of Elise's death was not. It's quite ironic, really. In this particular plot, Blaze the Cat is the most forgettable character, while Elise is the most important character. Yet, Blaze's death was more heart-wrenching than Elise's death. Like, how does that work? God, this writing's terrible. Now let's talk about Elise's kidnappings. This was going to happen. You can't talk about Elise's character without mentioning the number of times that she got kidnapped, which was far too high. Did the princess really need to get kidnapped 5 fucking times in the plot? 4 times in Sonic's story, and 1 time in Silver's story. Did this really need to happen? And 2 of those kidnappings could have been prevented, or at least stopped much sooner. Let's talk about the first one. Shortly before Elise gets kidnapped for the 4th time in the plot, Sonic decides to leave Elise alone in her castle just after rescuing her from Dr. Eggman. Because that was totally a good idea, right? Anyway, Dr. Eggman decides to threaten Elise with the destruction of her city, and Elise decides to go with him to prevent that. And Sonic is nowhere to be found during any of this. Although you do see him a short time later chasing after the egg carrier in Kingdom Valley, presumably after Tails supposedly tells Sonic that Elise chose to go with Dr. Eggman. But still, where exactly was Sonic when Elise was forced to go with Dr. Eggman? The game seems to be implying that Sonic wasn't even in the city at the time, which makes sense because Sonic would have rescued Elise much sooner otherwise. So, where did he go? Where could he have gone? Did he have his hands full with something else? I don't know, because the game never told me. He just disappears without any explanation whatsoever. God, if Sonic had just stayed close to Elise and had not been an idiot, he could have more easily stopped the egg carrier from crashing. But that's not what happened, and the egg carrier crashed anyway. And I love how Sonic was all like, "Oh my god, Elise died!" I just want to laugh. Like, dude, that was all on you. You could have prevented that. You chose to leave Elise alone without any protection whatsoever. And no, the Soleanna guards don't count. Shut the fuck up. And then you're all shocked that something bad happened to her. Nah, fam. Fuck you. You brought that on yourself. If it hadn't been for time travel, you would have been screwed. But you weren't. Because plot. Still, it seems that the writers needed yet another excuse for Elise to get kidnapped, hence Sonic's stupidity. And the excuses don't stop there. Let's talk about the other kidnapping that could have been prevented. Shortly before the 5th time that Elise gets kidnapped. Oh my god, the 5th time. Wow. Amy comes across Elise in Dr. Eggman's base after Elise escapes her surprisingly unguarded prison cell. Isn't plot convenience fun? An alarm rings throughout the base, and Amy leads Elise to safety. Then they're back in the city, and they bond a little. Now, what happens after that is perhaps the dumbest moment in the entire game. Amy leaves Elise right outside of the castle, and Elise tries to enter the castle. Guess what happens next? Go on, yes, do it. I guarantee you that you won't get it wrong. Elise gets stopped by Dr. Eggman and his robots. Again. Oh my god. I don't know. You see what I have to put up with? You see what I have to put up with? I don't get the stupidity of these characters. I really don't. I don't. Now, for the other 3 times that Elise got kidnapped, Those were pretty annoying too, but they were beyond Sonic's control, so they weren't as bad. Still, even on my very first playthrough of this game, I found the constant kidnappings annoying, and I used to like this game. I was willing to forgive the first 2 times that Elise got kidnapped, but when she got kidnapped for a 3rd time in Radical Train, I was legitimately annoyed. And after that point, I honestly just stopped caring about rescuing her. Even Princess Peach, of all people, doesn't get kidnapped and rescued this much in a single plot. She just gets relocated multiple times instead, so you don't actually rescue her until the end of the game. But seriously, having Princess Elise kidnapped that many times is frustrating and exhausting. Were the writers really unable to keep the plot moving without repeatedly victimizing a girl whose character arc was already non-existent? I guess not. On to the next problem. Now, let's talk about the 5th problem that Elise has. Her not crying for 10 years. Okay, at this point, I've realized that the more I progress through this video, the more I die inside. Did the writers honestly expect the audience to believe that a young girl can go 10 years without crying once? Like, how is that even possible? Elise is a psychologically normal girl. Plus, she's not exactly the toughest girl around, considering how passive she acts throughout the entire story. How can someone like her go 10 years without crying once? What a contrived plot device. Although that's not surprising because the game itself is full of contrived plot devices, including the princess herself. Now, let's talk about the final problem with Elise's character. How her crying affects Solaris. This is perhaps the most important plot point in the game, and the writers completely screwed it up. In Silver's story, we learn at the beginning from Memphilis the Dark that the destruction of the world was caused by Elise's death, which freed Iblis. This event was known as the Day of Disaster, or some shit like that. Whatever. Anyway, the game outright tells us here that Elise's death caused Silver's messed up timeline. Okay, that's easy enough to understand. But then we get to the Solaris incident. Shortly before the Duke died, he told the unconscious Elise that she must not cry or else her tears will call forth the flames of disaster, which contradicts what we were told earlier. Now we're being told that Elise has to cry, not die, for Iblis to be freed. Which is it, game? Is Elise supposed to die? Or is she supposed to cry? You don't make that clear. If Elise is supposed to cry, then there is no reason for her death to trigger Iblis, but it does anyway. Now, some of you are probably going to say, well, maybe the game is saying that whether Elise dies or cries, Iblis gets released, but Elise has to cry for Iblis to be able to join with Memphilis. This is actually not a wrong argument. After all, even after Elise dies in Sonic's timeline, Memphilis isn't seen trying to join with a newly freed Iblis in Silver's future. But he does join with Iblis when Elise cries over Sonic's death in the last story. So even if Elise dies, it still won't help Memphilis if she never cries, which the game strongly implies, if not outright states. But that argument just raises another question. Exactly how is Elise supposed to die without triggering Iblis? I ask because she can't live forever. Does killing herself count, whether it be intentional or accidental? Does getting killed by someone else count, whether it be intentional or accidental? Does dying of illness or some other abnormal condition count? Hell, I don't know because the game never fucking told me. The implication here is truly unsettling because it means that unless Elise, A, found some way not to trigger Iblis, B, found a way to be immortal, or C, found some way to pass the flames inside her to someone else, which would have condemned them to the same suffering that Elise went through, by the way, then nothing that Sonic, Silver, and Blaze do would matter because Elise is going to die anyway. It might not be now, and it might not be soon, but it will happen at some point. The writers could have easily fixed this plot hole by making it so that Elise only has to cry to release Iblis.
In other words, simply take the requirements of her death out. Granted, it wouldn't make the plot sound any less stupid, but at least the plot hole would be fixed, and there wouldn't be a meaningless death. That was all they had to do to fix an already messed up plot, but they did not do it. What makes this even worse is that Elise is already a person without an actual character or personality. Having a messed up plot point like this revolve around her just makes her look even worse than she did before, and I didn't even know that that was possible. Okay, let's recap the 6 reasons that I listed earlier as to why Princess Elise is not a good character. Number 1, her backstory is undeveloped. Number 2, her personality is non-existent. Number 3, her death was meaningless. Number 4, her kidnappings were far too frequent. Number 5, her ability to go 10 years without crying once was stupid. And number 6, her subplot that had a requirement that she cry or die to release Iblis was poorly written. Combine all of these reasons and it's quite easy to see why Princess Elise is such a bad character. Princess Elise is not even a character in her own right. She's just a plot device. Despite being very important to the plot, she doesn't exist as a person. She exists only to move the plot forward with her constant kidnappings, her dying, and her crying. She's just a damsel in distress, and not even a good one. This isn't to say that I hated the idea of Princess Elise. I actually didn't mind having a character like her. I didn't even mind that she seemed to have a crush on Sonic. But what I did mind was the execution of Elise's character, which was shit. I hope that whoever wrote Princess Elise's character, let alone the entire plot, decided to take writing lessons after this because, oh boy, they could certainly use some. Princess Elise just sucks as a character. Sorry, not sorry. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say about this bitch, cunt, hoe, girl, sorry. Hopefully y'all enjoyed that. Thank you for listening.